So today we're going to be working with multiplying integers. We're talking about multiplying integers. We're talking about multiplying at least two numbers together, and they're going to either be positive or negative counting numbers or zero. Now as we look at this, our essential question is going to be the product of two integers, positive, negative, or zero, and the conditions that will give us either a positive number, a negative number, or zero as an answer, and how we can tell what our answer is going to be before we even work out the problem. Now our goals for today are going to be to work with multiplying integers and to solve some real-life problems. So the first thing that we need to be aware of is that we can multiply integers together with the same sign. Now when we're multiplying these integers together and they have the same sign, that means they're either both positive or they're both negative, okay? Either both positive or both negative. We need to know what's going to happen. Now, the product of two integers with the same sign is always going to be positive. So if we have 2 times by 3, both of these are positive numbers. 2 times by 3 is going to give us a positive 6. Now the same thing is going to happen over here. We have a negative 2 times by a negative 3, and that's going to give us a positive 6. Because this negative and this negative, they're integers with the same sign, our answer is going to be positive. Okay, so no matter what two integers we have, big or small, as long as they have the same sign, the same charge, as long as that sign's the same, both positive or both negative, the outcome of that multiplication is always going to be positive. So down here we can look at this. We have a positive number times a positive number is going to give us a positive answer. Or a negative number times by a negative number is going to give us a positive answer. Now similarly, when we're multiplying integers with different signs, when they have different signs, that means we're multiplying a positive times by a negative or a negative times by a positive. So the product or the result of a multiplication of two integers with different signs is going to be negative. So that means a positive times by a negative is going to be negative, or a negative times by a positive is going to be a negative. So we look at this, we have a positive 2 times by a negative 3 gives us a negative 6. And that's because our signs are different. We have a positive times a negative, so our answer is going to be negative. Again, here we have negative 2 times by a positive 3, which means that our answer is going to be negative. It's going to be a negative 6. So when we're doing this, we can just treat it like normal multiplication and then use this information to determine whether our answer is going to be positive or negative. Again, when we are multiplying integers with the same sign, so positive times by a positive, our answer is going to be positive. A negative times by a negative, our answer is going to be positive. A positive times by a negative is going to give us a negative answer, and a negative times by a positive is going to give us a negative answer. So with our first example here, we're going to be multiplying integers with the same sign. So what we can do is we can treat this like normal multiplication. We can look at this and say, okay, we have 5 times by 6. And we know from our math facts that 5 times by 6 is going to be equal to 30. Now we just have to go back to make sure we have the correct sign. So we look here, we see that's negative and this is negative. Since they're both negative, we're multiplying with the same sign. That means that our answer has to be positive. Again, as we come over here, we can look at this and say 8 times by 12. Treat it like normal multiplication. 8 times by 12 is going to give us 96. And then we just have to determine the sign. We look here, this is negative and this is negative. So we multiplied integers with the same sign, which means our answer has to be positive. So it's going to be positive 96. Now, as we look at this, we can now multiply integers with different signs. So again, we're going to treat it like normal multiplication and then go back and figure out what sign each of those is going to have. So we can see 4 times by 3 or 3 times by 4 is going to be 12. Now with this is a positive times by a negative. They have different signs, which means that this is going to be a negative 12. Over here we have negative 7 times by positive 4. So before working this out, we can say, I already know my answer is going to be negative because we have different signs. A negative and a positive are different signs. So 7 times by 4, doing regular multiplication, that's going to give us 28. Then again, over here, we can treat it like normal multiplication. 9 times by 7 is going to give us 63. We can see that this is a negative and this is a positive, so they have different signs, which means that this is going to be a negative 63. Now again, for this last problem right here, we have 6 times by 6. So we look at this as going to be a negative 6 and a positive 6. So our answer is going to be negative because we have different signs on both of our integers. And 6 times by 6 is going to give us 36. So our answer is going to be negative 36. Okay, so go ahead and try these ones out on your own first. So pause the video now, and then afterwards you can push play again to make sure that you got the same answers that I did. So here we have 5 times 5, so it's a positive 5 times by a positive 5. Our signs are the same, which means our answer is going to be positive. And treating it like normal multiplication, 5 times 5 is going to be 25. Here we have negative 1 times by negative 9. So regular multiplication, which means we're going to have a 9, and now we just need to determine if it's plus or minus 9. So it's a negative times by a negative. They're the same sign, which means our answer is going to be positive. For number 3, we have 12 times by negative 2. So we look at this, we can treat it like normal multiplication. 12 times by 2 is going to be 24. Now we go back and determine whether it's positive or negative 24. So we look at the signs of both these numbers. We see this one's negative and this one is positive, which means that this is going to end up being a negative 24 because our signs were different. For problem number 4, we can see 10 times by, or negative 10 times by negative 6 is going to give us a positive 60, and that's because this is negative and this is negative. Same sign gives us a positive 60. So we're going to take that positive 60 and we're going to multiply that by 0. And we remember our rule that anything times by 0 is going to be 0, so our answer is 0. Again, we come down here and we can see in problem number 5, we have 4 times by 11. And when we have 4 times by 11, we're going to end up with 44. And now we need to know if it's positive or negative. So we see this is a positive and this is a positive. Multiplying it by the same sign gives us a positive answer. For number 6, we can see we have 7 times by 8, which gives us 56. We have a negative times by a negative. Since there's the same sign, it's going to end up with a positive. So our answer is going to be 56. For number 7 here, we see that we have 4 times by negative 6. So 4 times by 6 is going to give us 24. And since this is negative and this is positive, we can get a negative answer right here for negative 24. And finally down here we can see that this is multiplication. We can see that our multiplication can happen in any order because it's all multiplication all the way through. When we have this, then we can say, okay, 5 times by 4 is 20. It's a negative times by a negative, which makes this a positive. So 5 times by 4 is going to give us a positive 20. And I haven't done anything with this negative 7, so I still have to bring that down. So I have negative 7 times by positive 20 is going to give me 140. And I have a negative times by a positive this time, which is going to give me a negative answer. So I'm going to have negative 140. Okay, so now we're looking at using exponents. Now we need to be very careful as we're working with exponents and what exponents are talking about. So as we look at this, we can see that this 2 is going to tell us to multiply negative 2 two different times. So we're going to have negative 2 times by negative 2. And when we have a negative times a negative, our answer is going to be positive, and 2 times 2 is going to give us 4. So our answer to negative 2 squared is going to be positive 4. Now, this is where we need to be careful, because these parentheses allow this exponent to square this whole expression right here, this negative 2. But when we don't have those parentheses, we need to be careful because this 2 only goes with this 5 right here. So what we can think of this as saying is this up here where it says negative 2 squared, okay, because it has the parentheses, we're squaring the negative 2. Right here, what we can look at it is saying as, oh, we're going to find the negative of 5 squared. So we can look at it as negative 5 times by 5, and that would give us negative 25. Now, it's very nuanced, okay? And so we want to make sure that we understand this. When we have parentheses, we're going to be multiplying everything inside those parentheses the number of times in the exponent. When we don't have parentheses, we're only going to be multiplying the number that's attached to that, not including that negative sign. So down here for number 3, I guess, we're going to say negative 4 raised to the third power. Since there are parentheses around this, that means we're going to take negative 4 times by negative 4 times by negative 4. We did it 3 times because our exponent's a 3. Negative 4 times by negative 4 is going to give us 16. It's a negative times by a negative, which means that our answer's got to be positive. Now I have to bring down my next negative 4 here. So 16 times by 4 is going to give me 64. And now I just need to determine what my sign is. Well, it's a negative times by a positive, which means my answer is going to be negative. So my answer is going to be a negative 64. Now, as I switch sides over here, again, we're going to look at this. We have a 2. We have parentheses on this, which means I can take this negative 8 and times it by negative 8. I did it 2 times because I have a 2 for my exponent. And I can say, okay, negative 8 times by negative 8. 8 times 8 is 64. A negative times by a negative gives me a positive, so my answer is going to be positive 64. Now, as I look at this, this one does not have parentheses. When it does not have parentheses, I'm taking the negative of 9 squared. So I can think of this as the negative of 9 squared. When I look at this, I can now take 9 times by 9. So I take negative 9 times by 9. And when I look at this, I can then say 9 times by 9 is 81. They're both positive, so my answer is going to be positive 81. And then I have a negative of that answer, which means the negative 81 is going to be my final answer there. And again, here on this last one, I have the negative of 5 cubed. So I look at this and I say negative 5 times 5 times 5. I have 3 5s here because of this power right here is to the third power. 5 times 5 is 25. Times by 5 is going to be 125. So my final answer is going to be negative 125. So go ahead and try this on your own first, and then after you're done trying it on your own, go ahead and push play, and so you can see that your answers match up with mine. As we look at this, we are going to start with negative 3 squared. Because of the parentheses, we're going to be squaring the whole thing inside the parentheses. So it's going to be negative 3 times by negative 3. And we did it 2 times because our exponent is positive 2. Now, as we look at this, we have our negative times by a negative, which gives us a positive answer, and 3 times by 3, which is going to be 9. So it's going to be a positive 9 for our answer. For number 10, we can see that this is going to be, again, inside parentheses, so we're just going to multiply negative 2 3 times. So we negative 2, negative 2, and negative 2. When we have negative 2 times by negative 2, we're going to end up with a positive 4 because it's a negative times by a negative gives us a positive. And that's going to be times by that negative 2 that we haven't touched yet. So that's 4 times by negative 2, which then gives us negative 8. Now as we come over here, we can look at the negative of 7 squared. So because there are no parentheses, that means we're looking at just squaring the 7. So we're looking at negative 7 squared. So that's negative 7 times 7, which gives us negative 49. And when we look at number 12, again, we're going to be looking at the negative of 6 cubed. So we're looking at negative 6 times 6 times 6. And we did 6 times 6 times 6 because our exponent is a 3. As we do this, we'll find out that 6 times 6 times 6 is 216. So our answer is going to be negative 216. And 6 times 6 is 36. And 36 times 6 is going to be 216. Awesome. Okay, so we're looking here at our real life application here, where we're going to be looking at some situations where we can actually use multiplication in order to figure out some solutions. Now, in this situation, we have a bar graph which shows the number of taxis a company has in service. Now, in this situation, it says that the number of taxis decreases by the same amount each year for 4 years. And we want to find the total change in the number of taxis. So as we look at this, we don't know how many taxis we have here. Now, we could figure it out using some math, but we don't need to figure that out for this problem. What we do know is that from year 0 to year 1, there were 50 fewer taxis. From year 1 to year 2, there were another 50 fewer taxis. From year 2 to year 3, there was another 50 fewer taxis, and from year 3 to year 4, there were another 50 fewer taxis. So what we can do is we can set up an equation in order to model what's happening right here. The bar graph shows that the number of taxis in service decreases by 50 each year, and we want to model that situation in order to figure out the total change in the number of taxis. So what we can do is we can show the total change is equal to the change per year times by the number of years. So as we look at this, the total change, what we're trying to figure out, is equal to the amount of change that happened each year times by the number of years that we look at it happening. So as we look at this, we can say, okay, we have 50 fewer taxis. So an integer that would represent 50 fewer taxis would be negative 50, because there was a decrease in the number of taxis, so negative 50. And we're going to times that by the 4 years that we're looking at, because we're looking at it happening for 4 years. So that's our change per year, and that's the number of years that we're looking at. So negative 50 times by 4 is going to be negative 200. So the total change in the number of taxis was negative 200. They lost 200 taxis over the last 4 years. So let's look at another example here, another situation where we might use multiplication. So let's say a football jersey is marked down for $10 each week for 3 weeks, and we want to find the total change in the price of the football jersey. So what we can do is we can set up an equation. We can say, okay, we have our total change, and that's going to be equal to something. Well, we can set that equal to the $10 each week that it was marked down. So if we're thinking about marking something down, that generally means we're reducing the price of something. So as we reduce the price, or we decrease the price, or we lower the price, the integer that's going to represent that is going to be a negative 10, because it's going down each week. Now, we're doing this for 3 weeks, which means we're going to look at decreasing it by 10 3 different times. Now, as we look at this, we can take this negative 10 and times it by 3, and it's going to give us a negative 30. Now, in the context of this problem, this negative 30 means that there was a total change of $30, and that it was a decrease of $30 for this player's jersey. So on this last one right here, go ahead and try this one on your own first. Go ahead and pause it, and then afterwards push play to make sure that you got the same response that I did. Now, a manatee population decreases by 15 manatees each year for 3 years. Find the total change in the manatee population. So as we look at this, we have 15 manatees being removed from the population for one reason or another every year for 3 years. So since it's decreasing by 15, we can represent that with an integer as negative 15. Now we're doing this each year for 3 years. So that means we can multiply this by 3 because it happened 3 times. Over the course of 3 years, each year we decreased by 15 manatees. And that's going to equal the total change in the manatee population. So as we look at negative 15 times by 3, that's going to be equal to negative 45. Now this negative 45 in the context of this problem means that the total change in the manatee population was negative 45, that there are 45 fewer manatees in this particular population over the course of these 3 years. Okay, go ahead and work on this mini assessment. Make sure that it gets into your notes. That way I can check for it on Friday. For problem number 1, we have -4 times by -5. For problem number 2, we have 3 times by -3. For problem number 3, we have -1 times by -12. For problem number 4, we have -2 times by 15. And for problem number 5, it says you have $900 in a checking account. You pay a $60 cell phone bill each month using this account. The account balance is given by 900 plus -60t, where t is the time in months. What is the balance of the account after 4 months? So, what's essential in this is that we see this equation and that we know that t is going to be equal to 4. This is just like those last 3 problems that we worked on together. And as we look at this, it is the same thing. We're finding the total change. The only difference now is that we have a starting point, that $900. Now, using that starting point and the total change, we can figure out how much money is left in the account after those 4 months. So go ahead and give that a try. Make sure that it's in your notes so that I can check for it on Friday.